That you've tidied up your data, how do you go about analyzing it? So what I'm going to show you this week is how to do this via Excel. Now, you can also analyze your data through R, and I'll be showing you that next week. You might have been wondering, what is the point of tidy data? This is exactly the point of tidy data, is that I'm going to show you all the different ways and all the different questions that you can ask. If you don't tidy your data, you extremely limit yourself to the types of data that you can analyze, or the questions that you can ask and answer. When you tidy up your data, you can average all sorts of variables, get all sorts of different outputs. It's just extremely flexible. You won't have to copy, you won't have to paste, you won't have to do lots of different things that you might associate with data analysis. Let's go ahead and get started with Excel. We're going to use pivot tables and charts to summarize some of the questions. So the first is, maybe you might want to ask, what is the average module percentage? So I tend to use help a lot, so I just go pivot. I'm going to summarize that with a pivot table. I always put my pivot tables in a new worksheet. Now you're going to have a pivot table builder. So what you want to think about is, okay, if I want to know the module and the average percentage, then we want the module and we want the percentage. Now automatically puts it here in values. So the rows are the thing that we want to look at and the values are the output. So we're going to go here. And again, we don't want the count of the values. So we've got module here. So now it shows the modules. You may want to relabel that modules. And then the count of percentage. We don't want the count. We don't want to know how many. What this count represents is over here. You've got all of your data. Each row has a value or an outcome, or in behavioral sciences, we call it observations. So you've got 39 observations, or in our cases, submissions. 479, 392, all of those are submissions. So we don't want counts, although that might be interesting. We're going to get the average percent earned. And let's go ahead and display that as percentage. Let's just round to the nearest percent. We don't need to know the decimal, or at least I'm not interested in it. All right. So now you've got this. If you want to visualize it, go to the pivot table, or excuse me, go to chart, and let's do a column. So now we've got this visualized. You may choose, what's important when you visualize is maybe you want to highlight certain things. So let's go ahead and we could change that particular bar chart to orange and highlight maybe the top 2 or 3. You could also arrange the bar charts. So that way you can specifically change just one, because it's always nice to specifically highlight what you think is important when you're making a visualization. So the lowest is the midterm, but really we're looking at 85%. That's still pretty good. So be sure to look at your scale. So this might seem that it's half, but it's not. You may choose to adjust your axis so that it starts at 0, depending on what you want to look at. So we'll label this as average percent earned. And that's the module. So now let's say we want to look at the assignment type. Make another pivot table. Summarize with a pivot table. New worksheet. And we'll say average assignment types percent, because score is not the same as percent. And we want to do assignment type. So the type we want to look at, and then we want to look at the percent earned. So the type is the row, and again, we don't want count. We want average, number, and the percentage, and we're just not going to care about decimal places. That's up to you. And then if you want, you can also arrange by descending and ascending. You can also, if you don't want to mess with pivot tables after you do it and want it to be more permanent and adjust things, you can just copy and paste it. And then you've got just the plain data without it being in a pivot table if you want to copy and paste it elsewhere. So again, it looks like writing. So even though exams showed as low, for assignment types, writing had the lowest, but again, it's 85%. But it might be interesting to see if there's any reason why that is. And practices, because they can do more of them, it might be interesting to see if practices as a whole across modules vary. So maybe you want to then look at additional data. Maybe you want to look at the type and the module. So you'd have the modules going across the top. So we've got some wide format going on. And then you've got their average percent. Now, if you're going to leave it as a table, something interesting that you can then do is then you could just do conditional formatting rather than graphing, or you could do some type of bar chart. And we'll just have, maybe we'll have the maximum be green, bright green, because it's good. And the minimum, you could either go down to white, so it gets lighter. We'll just do that. So then you can see high versus low. It's all relatively, but look at that. The average score for writing is pretty low in lesson 1 and in lesson 12. But it could be that there is a low N, that not very many students have submitted it yet. So you might want to look at that. That's where it might be nice to have the same type of bar chart, but rather than have percentage, you have counts. So if the count is also low here, then that would make sense. I wonder if I can copy and paste a pivot table. I can. Okay, good. Let's see what happens. Let's say instead of average of percent earned, we do count. That. Oh, and we need to not format it like a percent. That's why it's just a number. Just a number. Okay. And then you can also do the gradient colors as well to see if it's somewhat, I don't know what happened there. It's probably the column's not wide enough. Okay, let's go ahead and then format this data. Conditional formatting. Also, high to low. Actually, let's remove that conditional formatting because this is screwing up the data. Having those big numbers in there. So let's remove that. We only want it right here. We only want it on the assignments. Otherwise, including those grand totals in the conditional formatting, it's best to just have a separate conditional formatting if you want to color it. Otherwise, as you saw, it's all white. Okay, so you only have 17 there, so it's really not a good representation. Let's just expand these a little bit so we don't get, ooh, not that much. Okay. But you could see how making a table like this or a pivot table really helps to see things. So you've got, if you do this, you've got your grand total, which is what we had before, which is the average across all modules for each assignment type. Now you've got the assignment type percentages. So it might be interesting to see, it could be that perhaps the students are learning how to do writing in Module 1. And what's interesting is that they seem to get better up through Module 4, and then they hover around this percentage, and then it goes down a little bit. But in general, it's still within just a few percentage points for the rest of the course, which is pretty good. So you may want to watch this over time to see how things are changing. Overall, the quizzes seem pretty straightforward too. Practices, there's not really any big dip in numbers. So this is one of the, and you can see the number of submissions. Now it might be interesting to see why the low dip in lesson 7. Are there fewer practices or are there just fewer submissions? So you may want to see how many practices there are. So that would be the assignment number. So we could go ahead and have the same thing. I don't want it inside a pivot table. Okay. Let's say we want, what did I say? We want the number of assignments rather than percentage earned. So we want that. Okay, we want you could do assignment ID or assignment title. It doesn't matter. They both represent the same counts. So we're not going to use this anymore. I'm going to do the count of the assignment. Actually, that won't work. I'll need to have that be done differently. If we did count unique, can it count unique? Yeah, I would have to look at how to do that in Excel before I did that with counting unique. Okay, so I've given you enough ideas. Hopefully you can play around with your data, see if there's some interesting things you find that you might take back to an instructor, or if you were an instructor, things that you might do.